Peace in from the black holes of Dakota, Tora Terry, United States of Advertising. Stan Gibilisco here. In a video a couple of days ago or a day ago, I mentioned the notion of a Faraday cage, that you might protect your systems against electromagnetic pulses by placing them in a Faraday cage, and I joked a little bit about that. Well, what is a Faraday cage exactly? Well, you might think of it as a downgraded zoo cage or the worst possible kind of prison cell. Imagine, you know, that kind of wired mesh that you put over a window to keep, to keep hail out. High winds and hail, for example. That crisscross mesh, that is a common material for Faraday cages, and solid metal, of course, will also work, although that's a bit more expensive. But suppose that you were to place all of your sensitive electronic equipment, ham radios, computers, everything like that, in a room whose walls, ceiling, floor, and doors were lined with solid metal, preferably steel, something ferromagnetic. And your windows had over them that kind of grating that you use to protect against high winds and hail, or people throwing rocks at your house, stray lawnmower rocks and things like that. So that your room was entirely shielded electromagnetically from the outside environment. Of course, you'd have to keep your windows and doors closed at all times when you possibly can, except when going in and out of the door, to protect your equipment fully. But there's still another thing you would have to do. Every wire that comes in through the wall of that particular chamber that you use for your nerd crib or nerd cave or nerd cell would have to, every wire, every cable that comes in there would have to have a very good surge suppressor. Technically, I believe they're called transient suppressors, installed right at the entry point, so that the electromagnetic pulses that might create surge currents on those wires couldn't get to your equipment from outside your nerd cell. That way you could protect your equipment pretty much 24/7 against what will eventually occur. Now, there is a certain engineering overkill point, but one may debate exactly where that point is. If I might tell a little story, I was in Miami prior to Hurricane Andrew, on the day before that hurricane, and I lived on the beach at South Beach, Miami, and I knew that there wasn't much of a way I was going to stay there. I had no car, so I took a taxi cab to the nearest friend's house I had, who happened to live in Homestead, Florida. $65 cab fare. I got down to that house figuring the hurricane would probably recurve away from there, and we would get the weak side, or maybe the eye wall would miss us entirely. But instead, we took a direct hit, and I mean by that, the eye of the hurricane was right over my head during the lull in the storm, and not only was it right over my head, but it was centered on my head. So I got to experience a textbook hurricane, and I have burned that into my memory forever and ever and ever, and then maybe even a little longer than that. And one thing I remember was that we boarded up the windows that didn't already have hurricane awnings on them, and one of them was on the north side of the house. And we took the wood, which happened to be pretty thick plywood. We didn't have nails, so we screwed that wood into the side of the house. And that wood was hard Dade County pine, in case you are not familiar with that particular kind of wood. You practically can't get anything into it. You can hardly even pound a nail into it. We had to use beeswax to get the screws in there. We put that thing on there and we called that over-engineering. But when Hurricane Andrew's eye wall finally arrived, the winds came out of the north at a sustained speed, which I still don't exactly know, but whose gusts probably approached 200 miles an hour. Not kilometers an hour, but miles an hour, and debris was flying against that house on the north side. Over-engineering, huh? Well, if you over-engineer the protection for your electronic equipment, you'll never be sorry when the electromagnetic pulse strikes, which it inevitably will. But if you don't, and you live long enough, sooner or later the sun's going to have the type of a fit that will deliver an electromagnetic pulse sufficient to fry the infranet. Isn't that a great slip? Infranet infrastructure. At least that's what they say. It might even knock out the power grid, although I don't know for sure about that. I guess it's kind of like Y2K. We really don't know. But if you over-engineer, believe me, you may be out a little bit of pocket money, but you'll never wish that you hadn't for any other reason than the fact that you're broken on the street and got a Faraday cage with a computer in it. But seriously, various types of electronic media can be protected much more easily. You just get a little steel box, a little steel safe, even a safe deposit box. You can put your outboard hard drives, your thumb drives, otherwise known as flash memory or flash drives, anything that has electromagnetic, magnetic or electric storage media. And then there's one type of medium, and I forgot to bring it along with me to show it to you, but you know what they look like. CD-ROM and DVD-ROM, or any other kind of optical media, are entirely immune to the effects of electromagnetic fields. They are optically based, and they will withstand the electromagnetic pulse, even if they're just lying outside on your picnic table. So I recommend that when you do your backups, and I have a particular regimen for backups, which someday maybe I'll go over with you, which I think is pretty successful. It's kind of hard to adhere to it sometimes, because it takes a little time, but CD-ROMs are among the media that I use. So I recommend that you back up your data on CD-ROM as often as possible. I guess the rule of thumb, or the thumb of rule, as a friend of mine used to say, is don't back up anything that you don't mind losing someday. If you want to keep it, back it up. And if you really want to put your stuff in a Faraday cage, and I haven't done that. I admit it, I haven't done that. I was disappointed when Y2K didn't melt down the mainland infrastructure, because I was on the big island of Hawaii, who got their electricity from oil, and they didn't even have computers in their power grid. Sometimes you wonder how many of them actually had computers at all. It was a great existence and a great excuse to go to a great place. But I'm not really glad. I wouldn't have really been glad if when that ball dropped in New York City and everything went dark, that commercial. I'm glad the lights stayed on, because then I could come back, which I eventually did, to the black holes of Dakota Territory, United States of Advertising. Climate could hardly be more different than that of Kailua Kona, Hawaii. But doggone it, I'm here. Don't ask me why sometimes. Stan Gibilisco signing off. Peace out. Until next time, so long.